Yo, what's up everybody? Welcome to this video as we continue with our discussion of integrating M-Pesa into our web and mobile applications. In this video, we'll write a Python Django code together, and at the end we'll come up with something like this. We will have a form which will take some inputs from the user, which will be the phone number and the amount they wish to pay. So I can just put my phone number there and the amount they want to pay, and if I click on pay, you can see it will process the form. Then it will, once the process is successful, it will send an STK push to that phone number. So let's just wait for it. So you can see now the STK push has been sent, and you can see it tells me that the STK push has been sent successfully to my M-Pesa number. It's here in my phone. So let me just cancel the request. So if the user does not interact with the STK push, it just stays like that. But once the user interacts with it, for example, I'll just cancel, I'll get a feedback tells me that the request was cancelled by the user. I can also click on this retry payment button to send the STK push again. So I'll just click on this retry payment and it will send the STK push again to the phone number I provided. So wait for it. So now it has sent the STK push to the phone number again. So this time let me just enter the wrong pin. So I've entered the wrong pin and I've sent. Okay, so it will tell me that the initiator information is invalid because I entered the wrong pin. So let me now take too long to pay. So let me just retry this payment once more. Then if I take too long to pay, but I think I set it at 30 minutes, so I set it at 2 minutes, that's too long. So let me just now pay. So if I pay, I'll enter the correct pin. Then I've paid now. Let me just enter. Okay, now I've entered the correct pin and I've paid. So once I pay, I'll get this beautiful confetti and it tell me that the payment was successful. So that's what we'll be creating, guys, and we'll be using Python Django as our stack of creating that application. If I click OK, it will just go back to the form. Yeah. My biggest assumption is that those who are watching this video are conversant with Django, so I'll not explain most of the Django stuff. I'll just go straight to how to do M-Pesa using Django. Maybe I can just give you a quick overview of what I have here. So I installed I created my environment, my virtual environment. Then I installed the various requirements that I'll use. So I'll use Django first. I installed Django. I installed Bootstrap 5. I installed requests, and I installed Django.env. So I pip freeze to get this file. I hope you're conversant with that if you know Django. Also, I created my project. I call it SRC, but you can just give it any name that you wish. Then I created my app. I called it M-Pesa Express. So this is my app. I called it M-Pesa Express app. Then obviously you have to add this to the installed app. So to the installed apps, I added the Bootstrap 5 and the M-Pesa Express app. Also, yeah, that's it with these installed apps. Then in my URLs, I added this extra path which I'll use my M-Pesa Express app to handle the URLs. So if you do this, you'll also have to add that urls.py in the M-Pesa Express. You know, this URL does not come while you create the app, so you have to create it manually. So you can see I just have only one URL, which is just the root, and just calls this view. So if you see the view, it's just a simple view, just 2 lines. I'm using this form. I'm just returning this HTML and displaying the form. So I have to have this form. I also created these forms. So you can see I imported it from forms. So in my forms, I have this form. You can see it's just a simple form with the phone number and amount. Also I have my models, which I have all those fields. I just have a simple model here which has these fields: amount, checkout ID, M-Pesa code, phone number, status, and the timestamp. So basically that's what I'll do. Also you can also see in my views, I have this payment HTML form which is here in the templates. You can see there's this payment HTML form, and you can see it's just a simple form. I'm using Bootstrap to style it, so this is just a simple Bootstrap form. So if you are conversant with Django and Bootstrap, this is just straightforward. I didn't add any functionality, so maybe I can just run that up so that you can see how it looks like. So I'll just run my server. Okay, let's wait for it to run. So it has run. So if I just open this, it's here. Let me just refresh it so that you can be sure it's the one. So you can see this is the form that I have. So if I just pay, you can see if I pay, nothing is happening currently. There's nothing happening. This is the one that I showed you. You can see it's hosted mpesa.janjaprogrammers.com. so if you want to play with this, you can just visit this hosted site here, but we'll just be building it from scratch again, and this will be our local host. So yeah, so that's what we need, and we'll be using the knowledge that we learned from the previous video to make this app functional and have all capabilities like we saw before. So if that sounds interesting, let's start coding. Since everything is running fine, we said first thing first is to get our credentials. So after we saw how we get credentials, so I'll advise you to just put your credentials in a .env file. So I'll just create my .env file here, and I'll give you the structure of how your env should be like. So I'll just say .env. Then this is how your env file should be. So you should have your consumer key. You have seen how you can get your consumer key, your consumer secret. You have seen how you can get your secret and your pass key for both the sandbox and the live environment. Also your shortcode, you will put your shortcode here. So you have seen how you get shortcode for live and sandbox. Then the base URL. So the base URL, we say that it's different for sandbox and for the live. So for sandbox, this one will be sandbox.safaricom. So for sandbox will be sandbox.safaricom.co.ke, but for live it will be api.safaricom.co.ke. so I'll be using the live because you said that the sandbox has some issues, but the code will just work both for live and for the sandbox, so no problem, whichever you use, no problem. Then here you'll just put your callback URL because you say that your callback URL should be a secret. We discussed more about callback URL, so we'll just put that also in the env. So after you put that, I'll just put mine. Let me just go to another file, then I'll just place mine. I've already placed my environment variables, so I'll just close this tab. And remember to keep your variables a secret. So yeah, your environment variables will be a secret. So just because I'll use them here, I'll just load all those variables here. So these are the variables that we used. And remember we installed this .env at the beginning, so I'll just use this .env to load the variables from the .env file. And here are the variables. Okay, so now since we have the credentials, the next step is to get the token, because remember we said that before you use any Safaricom API, you have to have a token, and the token is got from the authorization API. So that's what we'll do next. We'll get the token using the authorization API. Remember we said that you can make the call to authorization API a function so that you can call it every time. So I'll just use the code that we had previously, so I'll just paste that code here. We wrote and explained this code in the video where I talked about the authorization API, but we'll just go through it again. So this is just a function which I'm sending a get request to this URL, and remember this base URL, it's from the .env. We said that if you are using sandbox, the value should be sandbox.safaricom. If you are using live, it should be api.safaricom. So I put this a variable so that this code can work for both the sandbox and for the live. So if you are using sandbox and you want to go live, you can just change this value in your .env file. So yeah, so this is the code of getting the token. So you can see what this code does. It just returns the token. You can see if there's first you have our credentials, and we say that credentials, this encoded credentials, just the base 64 encoding of the consumer key and the secret key, and they should be separated by a colon, and there's no space between that. Then you just send a get request, and first we set our headers, and our headers will have this authorization key, and the value of that should be basic, a space, and the value of the encoded credentials. We discussed about this, so if you don't know about what's happening here, maybe you can check the video for authorization and you can learn more about what's happening. But the main thing about this function is if this response has access token, just return the access token, and if there is no access token, you can just raise this error and says that the access token is missing. But just anyhow you want, but the main key, this function should return an access token. That's the main function of this function. So yeah, now that you have the token, we can write a function of sending the STK push. So let us just do that next. Before we write the initiate STK push function, I've noticed that you have not been importing these packages I've been using, like you have not imported this OS. So let us just import the packages that you have used before you proceed. So I'll just import OS, because we have used OS. We've also used this base64 here, so I'll just import base64. And what else have we used and have not import? We have used these requests and we didn't import, so I'll just also import requests. So yeah, so now that we have those imports, I believe our code is now fine and we can proceed with writing the initiate STK push function. So for this STK push function, we'll just use the same code that we used while talking about STK push. So I'll just paste the code here. So this is the same code that we had initially. So you can see we are just getting the token because it said that you cannot use any other API before having a token. So we'll call this function up here, this generate access token. We'll just call it to get the token. Then we'll set our headers to bearer token, the token that we got here. Then now you can see we're using this timestamp, so we'll have to import that date time. So let me just import before I forget. So maybe I can just put that import here and just say import date time. Just say from date time, import date time. Yeah, like that. So that's the date time that we'll be using, so we'll use it here to get the timestamp. Then you've said that this timestamp will use it to get our password. So our password is just a shortcode plus passkey plus timestamp. This shortcode and passkey come from the .env that we created earlier. Then timestamp will just be the current time in this format: year, month, day, hour, minute, and second. And we'll use this date time package to get the timestamp. Then we'll use this base64 encoding to convert this to a base64 encoded value, and we already import this base64. Then we'll prepare our body, and our body will have this business shortcode. This shortcode is in the .env. STK password is here. This one, if it's Paybill, you can use customer Paybill online. If it's buy goods, you'll say customer buy goods online. So mine it's Paybill, so I'll just maintain it like that. Then amount and phone number. So you can see this function accepts phone number and amount as variables. So that's why you are passing this. So if you call this function, you have to pass the phone number and the amount. So you can see I'm passing the phone and the amount, which I'll get them as I call this function. We'll see it later. Then party B is the M-Pesa, is the shortcode. So I'll pass your shortcode here. We already explained the difference between Till and Paybill of various values. So if you don't know the values, you can just check the video you sent the STK push. Then phone is same as this phone up here. This and this are just the same thing. Then callback URL, we set this in the environment variable, so I'll just pass it there. Then this is that we also discussed about them. Then I'm sending a post request to this endpoint. We already discussed about this base URL. I get this from the env. Then the request body is here and the headers are there. So yeah, so that's how you send a post request to this endpoint here, and it will return a response. And this is how you send the STK push. We'll see how we'll handle this response. So currently I'm just returning the response, and we'll see later how we can handle this response to see whether the STK push has been sent or has not been sent. But as you know that a function will just do one thing, so what this function does, just sends a post request to this endpoint, then returns the response. So after calling this function, we'll get back a response, and we'll see what we'll do with that response. So yeah, so now that we have these values, and keep in mind that we have a form where we get this phone and amount. So maybe before we proceed, let us just handle the data we get from this form. Keep in mind we get the phone number and the amount of the user who is trying to pay. So let us see how we can handle that and use those values to call this initiate STK push function. Currently our views are just displaying the form, so we can make this view to handle both the form submission and also to display the empty form. So to do that, you can just add an if statement up here. So I can say if the request.post. So I'm checking if the request method is post. So I'll say if request.method is equal to post. So if the method is post, I'll do something. So if it's not post, is when I'll display the form. So I'll say else. So this else is for if it's not post, just display the form. So if it is post, I'll do some things. First, I'll get the data from the form, and our form is called payment form. So I'll just say payment form. then I'll get that data request.post like that. Then I'll store this in a variable. Let me call it form, but you can just call it any name as long as it's not a keyword. Then I'll check if my form is valid using the isValid method. So I'll say if form is valid. If form is valid, the method is here. So I'm checking if the form is valid. So if it is valid, I'll get the phone number and the amount that the user has posted. So I'll just, if the form is valid, I'll get the phone, and to get that phone, I'll just use this form.cleaned data, this one. Then I'll get, since I called it phone number in the form that we created, so I'll just get the name, which is just phone number, phone_number. So this is the name that we called it here in our forms.py, this name here. So yeah, that's the name that I'm using to get the data. Then the same, but now instead of getting the phone number, I'll get the amount, because you can see our form have the phone number and the amount. Then I'll store this in a variable. I'll call it just phone to make it simple. Then this I'll also call it amount. So now I have my phone and the amount. So we can use this to call the initiate STK push function. But remember, users, especially in Kenya, they put their phone number 07, then the other numbers, or +254 and the other numbers. But Safaricom requires the phone number to be 254, then the other digits. So to cater for that, we can have a function that will convert the input that was input by the user to convert it to the desired number. So to do that, I have this function. I got it online, so you can just get online. What this function does, it takes in the phone number that the user has inputted as an argument. Then if the user just put +254, we'll just remove the plus and replace it with an empty string, then just return the form as is. And if the user started with 07, you'll remove the 0 and add 254 before the other digits. So if this handles the case where the user puts +254 and the other digits, and also where the user puts 07 and the other digits. So this function works. So I'll not just pass this phone the way the user inputted. Instead, I'll pass it to this function first before I store it. So I'll call this function here. It's called format phone number. So yeah, so I call this function format phone number before I save that variable form. Now, since my phone number is okay and my amount is okay, I think this amount is saved it as integer because Safaricom requires it to be an integer field. Amount is a decimal field, so it should be an integer field. Since we didn't save that, maybe you can just handle that this side. You can pass it here as int. You can call the int function you can call this int function the inbuilt int function that converts that number into an integer before passing it to amount. Or you can try catch and handle that error, but I think this one is simpler. So okay, now since you have this phone number in the correct format and the amount in the correct format, you can just call the initiate STK function, this initiate STK push function, which takes in the phone and the amount as arguments. As you can see here, up here, we defined it here. It takes the phone and the amount, and that's what you're passing to it here. And you have seen it returns a response, so you can just store the return type here. So I'll just store here, I'll store this data as response like that. So I'll call this function, then it will return response, then I'll store it as a response like that. Okay, so if you saw how we did the STK push, you know that once the STK push is sent, we get a response, and the response is an object. So that object contains a response code. There is a key called response code, and if the STK push has been sent successfully, the value of that response code is usually 0. So to display correct information of whether the STK push was sent or not, we can check for that value. So I'll just say if the response then I'll get that response code. So it's capital R, capital C. So I'll get that response code and I'll check if its value is 0. So I'll check if that value is equal to 0. So if that value is 0, I'll know that the STK push has been sent successfully. So I can do, maybe I can just return, let me just return a page for now, but we'll come back to it later. So I can render a page here. Can render page. We'll create this page. Let me just call it, you can just give it a name, let me just call it pending, because the transaction is still pending. Pending.html. Okay, I'll not pass anything. So if the STK has gone well, just call this function. If it hasn't gone well, so I'll put an else here. If it hasn't gone well, there's usually in the body there's usually a error code. So we'll just check the response. If it has the error code, get not error code, error message. It just our error message like that. So I'll get this error message. So if it's there, I'll just store it to a variable error message. You can just give it any name also. I prefer it to be just error message. And also you can just, maybe I can put a fallback in case the STK push fails and there's no this error message. I can just put a fallback here. I can just say fail to send STK. Please try again. Okay, so this one handles whether the STK push was sent or not. So if the STK push has been sent, no, this one I've not finished. I should return something. So I'll return, let me return the same form. So I'll just return this same form here. So let me just copy this line instead of typing it again. So I'll return the same form, but now with an error. So I'll return the same message, but now the same page, the same payment HTML form page, but now I'll add an extra value of the context here, which will just be error message, whose value will be error message, like that. Okay, so this is how we handle that form. Then we can just create this. Before we run our code, let's just create this one so that we don't have errors. So I'll create my pending HTML here so that we don't have some errors. Pending, like that. We'll come back to this later, so I'll just put some boilerplate here. We'll come back to this later, so I'll just put here maybe h1 saying pending page. We'll come back to this later. Okay, so also in this payment form, maybe you can put where we'll handle the errors, because you have seen if the STK push is not sent, we send the error to the front end. So above this form we can put the error there. So I'll just say here, I'll check if there's an error message. If there's an error message, I'll display the error. So let me just put it below this. Let me just put a comment. I'll say display error message, so that I can know this line I'm just displaying the error message. So I'll first check if there's an error message. So this, you have seen that this error message, you pass it in the views. So I'll check if there's error message. I missed the spelling here, just double R, error, like that. So if there is error, no, you call it error underscore message. How did we call it in the views? We call it error message, like that, with the camel case thing. Okay, let us just use camel case also here. So if there is that error message, let me just end if here, because I usually forget to end if. So if there is that error, I'll just create a div with a class alert danger, like that, and this div will just display the error message, and you saw it's camel case, so error message, like that. Okay, so we can just run our server to confirm everything is just fine. So So you just see our server is still running. Let me just restart it. We can confirm everything is working fine. So I have run the server. Let's wait for it. Okay, it has run well, so I'll just click this link to open it. Okay, it has opened. I'll just close the previous one. So if I put my number now and put amount, then click on pay, let's see if it will send the STK push. Oh, there's an error. We used this and we didn't import. I forgot to import we used regex here and we didn't import it. I forgot that. We used this here and we didn't import that. I think that's the error, so I'll just import it up here. So I usually forget these imports. Okay, so I'll save it, and maybe you can refresh our page to see if the error is still there. So maybe you can just try that again. Put my number and my amount, click on pay, fingers crossed. Let's hope it works, but I think it's just fine. There's no problem. You can see it goes to the pending page because we said that if the STK push has come to my phone, and it goes to this page because you can see here in our views we say that if the STK has been sent, where is it? Payment view. You've said if the STK has been sent, we just render this pending page, and you can see the pending page currently it just displays pending page. So I think the STK push has worked, and it is here in my phone. But you can just see also, I think we didn't print. We can just print this response so that you can see it here in the terminal. Let me just print this. I'll just cancel it here so that I can resend it again. So I'll just print the response so that you can see it in the terminal. Response. So let me just save that and go back here and go back to the form again. It has not started. Okay, now it's loading. Okay, now if I put my phone number, maybe the amount, then now pay, and check these logs here. So you can see there's this object that is returned here, and you can see there's this response code that I was talking about. So if the response code is 0, this one here, if the response code is 0, it means that the STK has been sent successfully. You can see success, request accepted for processing. That means that the STK push has been sent successfully. So that's how we send the STK push. Before we handle the callback, I think it's important for us to style our pending HTML first and make it make sense. So there's this template that I have here. It's just a simple card, a bootstrap card that displays this information: confirm your payment, then says STK push has been sent. Then there's this loading spinner that loads to tell the user that something is going on. Then I have this repayment button, which when I click, it just reloads the page. We saw that when you click retry payment, it retries, but you can see currently the display is none. We'll add some JavaScript to this. So this is just the template, so that you can see this one has this ID, confirm text, ID, status container. We'll use this to modify this text with JavaScript, but currently let us just leave it the way it is, just plain, and we just save it and see how it looks like. So maybe I can just restart my server, but if you have that browser reload, I think that package is good, but I didn't see it necessary for us to have it in this small app. So if I just go back and refresh this page, so I'll just refresh it. So you can see I can just put my phone, then if I put amount, then if I click pay, I'll have that some loading spinner. Yeah, I'll have this loading spinner telling me that something is going on. Yeah, that's what we added in that pending HTML page. So if I click cancel or I do anything, nothing happens because we didn't handle what happens when someone clicks. Okay, so let us just do that next. We already discussed that once the STK push has come to a user's phone and the user interacts with the STK push, for example, they pay. So if they pay, Safaricom will send you a callback to the callback URL you provided. Also, if someone if the payment, the Safaricom sends you a callback whether the payment was successful or not. I think we discussed that. So how we handle the callback is that the callback, we know that the callback will come whether the transaction is successful or not. So you have to differentiate a successful transaction from a failed transaction, and we discussed in detail about the callback. So I'll just paste the code that we had before. So this is the code that we had initially. So these are the imports. I'll just move them up there. These are the imports that we'll use. This is just the same code that we had in the video I discussed about the handling callback. So I'll just move those imports up here. So I'll just put the imports there, and just to avoid repetition, I'll just put this JSON here and remove this line to save lines of code. I believe the rest are just fine. Okay. So yeah, so I'll just explain how this is. But before I forget, you have to provide a URL for this view. So before I forget, let me just provide the URL here. So I'll just duplicate that, then provide the path. Maybe I'll say callback, but you can just give it any meaningful path. Then the name of the view was called, did we call it M-Pesa callback? So I'll just copy this, then paste it here in the URLs here. And I can just call it callback, or I can just call it M-Pesa callback, any name that you wish. But keep in mind, Safaricom are the one who will post to this endpoint. So don't expect you to go to /callback and that's why you're seeing you're just handling post request. So if it's a get request, we'll return this HTTP bad request and say only post requests are allowed. So if you just go to your browser manually and say /callback, it will return this bad request. So what we do here, we just first pass the callback data from the request body. That's why we imported this JSON, because we're using it to load that data from the JSON, the request body, and save it into a variable. Then we saw how this object looks like. It's a huge object which is nested in, and inside it there's other objects. So there's this key body, which has another key called STK callback, and this STK callback has another key called result code. So if a transaction is successful, the result code will be 0, and if the transaction is not successful, the result code will be any value other than 0, depending on what happened. If the user cancelled, it will be 1032. If it is sufficient balance, it will be a different value like that. Okay, so if the result code, so here in this code, you check if the result code is not 0. So if the result code is not 0, you are sure that the transaction was unsuccessful. So we are not interested in that thing. We just return this error message because we know that the transaction was not successful. Otherwise, we know that the transaction is successful. So I'll just get the checkout ID from that body. Then I'll get this array of items. We saw that this items is an array which contains the amount, M-Pesa code, and the phone number that the person used to pay. And we'll get these values and save them in our database. So you can see in this here we're saving the transactions into our database. Then after that, we can just return a JSON response. And if there's any error that you see, we're using try except. So if there's any exception, it will be caught by this block of code here. So this is how we handle the callback. So you can't test this unless you are online. So you say that you have to be online for you to test this. So for you to test this, you can just go to host your site. Mine is already hosted. Maybe you can test it with the other that hosted. Yeah, I'll show you. I can show you how you get how that. But it's just simple. If it is successful, I'll just save to the database. That's the only thing I'm doing. Maybe I can just show you how my database is to prove that this callback works. But as I said earlier, for Sandbox, sometimes it fails for Sandbox. That's why I always advise people to use the live environment. For live, it never fails. For Sandbox, there's some network issues that are always accompanied by it. So for now, we can't test this unless you are live. But I'm not interested in this because it's just straightforward. There's nothing you can do. Just go live, test your app, and everything will just work. And this is the code that you'll use. Nothing is changing here. Just the same thing. So yeah. So we said that obviously you can use this callback to give the user feedback. But you said that this callback comes slightly late. It's not it's not real time, not pop, not immediately. It comes, but sometimes it delays some seconds. So to get some real time immediate data, we use the query API. And the work of the query API is to check for the transaction status. You can use this to give the user, because this one also works, you can use this to give the user feedback if the transaction is successful or failed. But for good user experience, it's advisable for you to use the STK query because it's fast and compared to this callback. So that's what we'll use next. So I'll just write some. We'll use the STK query API to. Let me just close this to save some space. I'll close that. What else I'm not using? So I'll just close these things which I'm not using to save some space. Also this, we're done with it. So I'll just close it. But we'll use this in the other. Also this something. I think we're done with it. This one not yet. This one also we're done with it. We can just close it. This one not done with it. Okay. So let us just see how we can use the STK query API to query the status of the transaction. So also this, I'll just paste the code that we had earlier. So this is the code that we had. I've pasted it. So it's here, the STK query push status. So I'll just remove this print statement here. You don't need that. Okay, so this is the code that we had. We said that this STK query, this query STK push depends on this checkout request ID. So you have to find a way how you can pass the checkout request ID, and this checkout request ID is got. We saw it's got when someone sends an STK push successfully. They have that checkout request ID. So you have to find a way how you can pass it so that this function can receive that ID. And we'll see how we can do that, but let's just continue with this, then I'll show you how you can do that. So what this view does, just generates the token, because you know you cannot use any other API without using the authorization API. So this line must be the first to you must get the token first before doing anything else. So I got the token, then I set my headers. The header is just bearer token, bearer space, then the token that you generate, then the timestamp. So this is almost similar that like the one we did with the STK push. You get the timestamp, you set the password, and you set your request body. The only thing with this is that the request body now requires this request checkout ID, and this ID is got when someone sends an STK push. Then just like the rest, we just send a post request to this endpoint that Safaricom gave us. Then yeah, that's it, just simple like that. So that's how this function works. You can see I'm printing this response so that we can see how it looks like in the terminal. And also I'm catching the exceptions that might occur. So let us see how we can store this. Where is it? Yeah, how we can store the checkout request ID. We know that this response here, when you send the STK push, I'm back to this payment view here where we are sending the STK push. So when you send the STK push, this response contains the response code. It also contains the request checkout ID. I think we saw how that object looks like. It also contains the request checkout ID. So maybe I can just get that ID here. So in this line, I can just get the ID. I'll just say response. So I'll get this request checkout ID. Then I can store it to a variable. Let me just store it to a variable. You can just give it any name. So now I got this checkout request ID from this response because you have seen it's there in the response. So I just get it like that. Now that I have that ID, so I can find a way how to pass it. So I'll just pass it to the front end because I will call this. We'll see how. Let me just pass it to the front end, then we'll discuss why we did that. So the key will be that, and the value will also be that. I'll put there, and the value is that. Okay, so now I got the checkout ID here when I send the STK push. You have said that if the response in this initiate STK push, if the response code is 0, it means that the STK push has been sent successfully. Then the response of that STK push has this request checkout ID, which I'm getting here, and I'm storing it in a variable. Then I'm passing it to the front end like this. So that's how I did that request checkout ID. So I'll create another view. Actually, I'll just paste it. Let me just paste it down here. Then I'll explain it. So I'll just paste it here. Then before I forget, let me just add the URLs for its URL. So I'll just duplicate this one, then change this to STK status, then also here to STK status, the name, then I'll copy the name of this view and I'll use it here in the URLs. Okay. So yeah, so this is the view, and the work of this view is just to query the STK status and return it to the front end. So you can see here first, we saw that we sent this, we sent this checkout ID to the front end. So in the front end, we'll perform a post request and we'll post that checkout ID from the front end to this view now. So now this view will receive that checkout ID. So you can see first I'm receiving the data here using this JSON.loads. I'm receiving the whole data. Then inside this data, I'll get that checkout request ID that I sent. I'll send it to the front. I've not written the front end code. We'll just write it, but let us finish this back end side first, then go to the front end. So I'll receive that checkout request ID. Then after receiving that, I'll call this STK query STK push function that we wrote up here. Now this function, I'll call it and I'll pass that checkout ID. So you can see the checkout ID, you got it here. Where is it? You got that checkout ID here. We posted it to this front end part, this pending HTML. We post it to the front pending HTML. Then in the front end, we'll see we'll post that data again to the back end, and we'll receive it to this other function here. So you can just find any way that you can move that checkout ID from here, and you send it to and use it in this function for the query, because you have seen this query requires a checkout ID, and it has to be the checkout ID that you get after sending an STK push. So this is the method that I found, but you can just find your own method, no problem. Okay, after getting the STK, the checkout request ID, I call this STK query STK push function, and I pass the checkout ID there. Then this function, as you can see, it returns a response, just returns this JSON, and I'm just sending the status of, I'm storing it to this variable status, then that's what I'm returning as a JSON response. We'll see, you can see I'm just returning this status as a JSON response. So we'll see how we'll handle this also in the front end. So I think this is the full backend. We have all the views we need for querying, and for, you have seen how STK push works. This callback will not look at it for now. Let us just write some JavaScript, and the main thing is just sending a post request to this view, or this, yeah, we'll send to this endpoint. This is the actual endpoint that will send the post request to, and if you send to this endpoint, you'll call this view, which is here, and this logic will be done. And you have seen in line 189, it calls the STK query function here that we wrote here. This function will be called, and it will give us the status of the transaction. So that was too much story. Let's just go to the front end and write the JavaScript part of it. Okay, so I'll go to my pending HTML, and that's where I'll write our JavaScript, because you know this page is rendered once the STK has been sent, and this is where we want to check the status every time. So I'll put my script here, script like that. Then here is where I'll write my JavaScript. So first I'll create a variable where I'll store my request checkout ID, and you know that since we passed it in the front end, you can just get it like this here in the front end. Since we passed it from the views, you can just, I think we call it, let's just confirm the name which you call it so that you don't miss the spelling. I'll just copy it, it's here, so I'll just copy this name so that I don't miss the spelling. I'll just copy it and use it as is, that. Okay, now that I have the checkout ID, I'll create a function to make my life simpler. I'll just call it STK push query, and I'll make it an arrow function like that. and this function takes in a checkout ID, so I'll just paste it. It'll just take in a checkout ID in that function, and we want the logic here, we want it to be run after a certain interval, let's say after every 2 seconds, and to check the transaction status after every 2 seconds. So to do that, I can use this set interval function. It's an inbuilt JavaScript function, and I can pass in a function. I'll pass in a callback function here. I'll make it asynchronous, so I'll just say async. Then I'll use another function also, like that. Then innocent, yeah, like that. Then inside here now is when I can I can send my request to that endpoint that I created. So inside here, maybe I can use the try catch. So in case the request doesn't go, so I'll use the try catch here. So I'll try catch block. I don't know why my autofill is not cooperating, so I'll have to type it myself. Catch, yeah, like that. Try catch. Okay, so here we'll send a post request to our endpoint. So I'll use fetch. Let me just use fetch. So I'll just say fetch. Then I'll fetch. I'll send to this endpoint. We call it STK status, but you can just confirm what was the name of it was called STK status. STK status here. This is the URL. So I'll just send to that URL STK status. STK status, like that. So now I'll send a post request to STK status. So I can just pass additional parameters here to which I can specify the method, and my method is post. Also, maybe I can set my headers. I'll just put here the content type and the SRSF token. Content type, which is application JSON. And also I can set my SRSF token. I'll just say cross-site reference forgery token, like that. Then I'll pass my CSRS here, but as a string. So I'll put this as a string also. CRSF cross-site reference forgery, like that, token. Okay, then also let me just scroll so that you can see. Then also I can attach my body, my request body. So I'll just say body, and here in the body now I'll pass my checkout request ID. But now I'll have to make it. I'll use the JSON to stringify so that I can convert it into a string so that I can post it now. JSON.stringify. Then now here I'll put the request checkout ID, like that. Okay, now I'll pass this variable here because I called it this name. So I'll pass this variable here. Yeah, like that. So this is the data this is the thing that you're trying to send to the backend, and you already handled it in the backend. You can see in the views we are receiving this request checkout ID here. In the here, you can see you are receiving this request checkout request ID. That's the thing that you're trying to send here from the front end part. Okay, so after sending that, maybe you can try to catch any errors and log them. Maybe you can say if there's an error, you can just log the errors. CLG. Let me just log the error direct. So now after in this set interval, after sending a post request to this endpoint, we also receive the response. We know that this will return a response, so let's just check. So this one will return a response. You can store that response in a variable. So I'll just call it, let me just call it response. And for this to get data before going to the next line, we can use async await. You already use async and just put here await for it to wait for this to finish fetching before going to the next line. That is asynchronous JavaScript. Okay, then now you have stored the data in the, you have stored this response in this response variable. Then you can check if the response is okay. So I'll just put an if condition here. Check if response. No, I'll check if the response is not okay. So I'll say response.okay, and I'll put a note here. So if the response is not okay, I'll just throw an error. So I'll throw an error, and I'll say fail to fetch status. Like that. So if the response is not okay, I'll just throw the error and say fail to fetch status. Okay, so if the response is okay, it will go to the, if the response is okay, it will go to the next line. So I'll just get the data. So I'll just call it data. So I'll say response. So I'll first convert it to JSON. So I'll say response.json. Then I'll store it to a variable. I'll call that data. You can also await this one also. Okay, then for now let us just log the data first so that you can see it. So I'll just log that data. Let me just log the data. But let me just put some, I'll say response. We'll see this in the log in the browser. So let me just log it, then we'll see it in the browser. Okay, so I believe that's fine. If there's any error, we'll just catch the error. Then there's this set interval. You have to provide a time. After how long do you want to run that interval? So I'll run after every 2 seconds. So I'll just provide 2000 milliseconds. That is 2 seconds. So after every 2 seconds, I'll be running this. So that's fine. You can just go to the browser and confirm it's working. So let me just go to the browser, refresh this page. I refresh, then I'll just open my console here, because they're logging it in the front end. So I'll just open this console for here. Then I can see I've entered my number and the amount. So if I click on pay, let me just click on this console to see that the data is logging correctly. Let's see if it is logging. I forgot to call the function. So we wrote a function, but we didn't call it. That's so wrong. So this function is not being executed because we didn't call it. So I can just call it down here. Where is it? They can call this function because it's not being executed. That's why I'm not seeing anything in the logs. Maybe I can just call it as the last thing down here. And you have seen you have to call it with the checkout ID. So I'll call it this checkout ID here. Just copy that and paste it here, then save, then go back to the browser and confirm if I have my logs. So I'll just restart this app again, then enter my phone number, enter the amount, then pay. Just see the logs if something will log there. Yeah, you can see it's logging now. So if you look at this response, you can see there's this error code 500.00.1.00.1, this error code. So if you see this error code, know that it is processing. So don't handle this error. So maybe the first condition will be, if you get this error, don't do anything, because this error means that the user has not interacted with the STK push. Like currently I didn't interact with the STK push. That's why you're seeing, that's why I'm getting that error. But once I interact with it, that error will change. It will come another error. So let me just stop this and get the STK push again, so that you can see. Now you can see what I'm talking about. So if I put my number, put the amount, then pay, wait for the STK push to come. So the STK push has come, but I didn't do anything. So if I didn't do anything, this error is there. So now let me interact with the STK push by cancelling it. So I'll just cancel. So if I cancel and look at this response here, you can see it will tell you that, let us just open it again. You can see it will tell you request has been cancelled by the user. So you can see you are getting what the user has done, whether he has cancelled or he has done something. We are getting the status of the transaction. So you can see the result code now is 1032, and the description is that request has been cancelled by user. Maybe I can just send the STK push again and maybe do something else. You can see the interval is still querying because we didn't clear the interval. We'll handle that, but now let us just see all the conditions first before we handle anything, because if you understand, it will be easier for us to handle those. So you have seen the first thing is that if you see the error, the 500.001.1001, no, that is not an error, it is just processing this error. If you see this error, just don't do anything because the user has not interacted with the STK push. And if the user interacts with the STK push, you get a different error. So maybe now you can just enter a wrong pin, then you can see the message that will come. So let us look at this one. I believe this has the message. You can just check it. You can see it tells you the initiator information is invalid because I entered the wrong pin. So now let me just pay so that it can be successful, and you can see what we get there. So I'll enter my phone number, the amount, then now let me now pay. So now I'll just pay, then we'll send. So if I pay, then I look at this response, just open it. You can see result code is 0, and I've seen if the result code is 0, it means that the user has paid. So this one is the one that shows that I have paid. So this is the things that we'll be looking. We'll be looking at this response code, and you have seen the result code. If it is not 0, it means that someone has not paid, and the result descriptions tells if there is an error, maybe if they cancelled. This is what we'll get the message from what the user has done. We'll get it from the result description. I believe it's okay. Also, if you just look at the logs here in the backend, you can see it's just printing those. The same thing is just being printed in the backend because we printed it in the backend too. That's why I'm seeing these logs being printed in the backend. But I think here in the browser, it's easier to see them. It's easier to see them here than there. So that's how it is. So you can see the app is complete. All the logic is working fine. The only thing that is remaining now is now to make the user interface look good. So since everything is complete and the only thing is just to put if conditions and check what is happening, then handle each condition separately. The first condition we'll check is if we have that 500.00.1001 error, and if that is the condition, we won't do anything. And if the result is 0, someone has paid, and if it's anything else other than 0, someone has not paid. So I'll just paste a code, then I'll explain it. So I pasted a huge code. You can see it's almost 167 lines, but most of it is just UI. I'll explain the logic part and maybe some few UI parts. So maybe I'll just go straight to the important things. So this is the most important thing, this part for sending the fetch, and this part we did this part till here. And then now after doing that part, you have seen that this data has result code and result description, and these two things are the ones that are important to us. The result code to check whether someone has paid or not, and the result description is mostly used when the transaction fails what has the user done. That description is what you want to display to the front end. So after getting these two variables, the first thing I said is check if you have this error, and I said if you have this error, don't do anything. You can see I'm just logging that payment is still being processed. So if you have this error, don't do anything. So maybe you can just put something here, and the easiest thing is just to put a console.log because you have seen that if you have this error, it means that the user has not interacted with the STK push. Okay, the other condition is that if the result code is 0. So if the result code is 0, I'll clear the interval. You can see here set interval, I stored that to timer. Then now I'm clearing the timer. This set interval returns I'm forgetting that word. It returns that thing, I've forgotten it. Then if you just clear that, if you call clear interval timer with that, it clears the timer. Okay, that's how that interval works. So if the result code is 0, I'll stop querying. This means that I'll stop querying because I'll have cleared the timer, so it will stop querying. Then the other important thing, I know that this someone has paid, then I'll just do anything else that I want to do. You can see this is I'm just changing the things in the HTML using JavaScript. Okay, so this is the other condition. If someone has paid, you can do anything that you want. Then the other thing is if there's a result code and it is not 0. This is the other condition. If there is a result code and it is not 0, here the result code is there and it is 0. So if it reaches this line, it means that there is a result code and it is not 0. So even if that is the case, just also stop querying because someone has interacted with the STK push. So if someone interacts with the STK push, just stop querying. So I'll just clear the interval, then I'll display the result description. So we say that this description is what the user has done. If he has cancelled, we say the result has been cancelled by user. If he has done something, you'll just display the thing that the user did. So that is the main thing that you're supposed to know. This other thing is just urembo, so I'll not go into detail about that. Then the other thing that I did is that I added this I added a request count. So every time this function is called, I am incrementing the the request count. Then I also have maximum attempts here. My maximum attempts are set here. So currently it's 60, but I think maybe 30 should be good, or 50. Also 15 should be just fine. 15. So it will be 15 times 2, which is 30 seconds. Which 15 times 2 seconds. 15 times 2. 2 times 15, that is 30. Okay, that is, I'm trying to check after how long. I'm trying to put how many times this function should be called. Then after that, maximum attempts have been reached, just clear the interval, then they'll tell the user that they took too long. That's what I'm trying to do. Because you can see every time I'm calling this function, every time I'm calling this function, I'm incrementing the value of request.count. Every time this function is called, I'm incrementing this value. So when at the start it is always 0. Then every time this function is called, it increments. And this function is called after 2 seconds. So after 2 seconds, it will be 2. So to know after how long this one will be reached, so it's 2 seconds times 15, that is 30 seconds. Yeah, I believe that's 30 seconds. So if you wanted it to be after 30 seconds, you can just cancel you can just tell the user they took too long to pay and you cancel. So most of these things is just the front end, just JavaScript, but those things that I explained are the main thing. Then you'll notice that I added some, where is the submit button? Where's the submit button? Okay, even here in the payment also I can add some JavaScript, because you see if you click this payment button, it tells you processing, then it submits. Maybe I can just add that now. So to add that, maybe let me just paste this updated code. So you can see I just put some few lines of JavaScript code, and I added this spinner here. When someone clicks this pay button, this by default this spinner style is hidden. So when someone clicks submit, the spinner is being visible, it's being shown, then the text is turned to processing. So that's the thing that I did, so that someone cannot click pay 2 times. So this is just a simple tweak that I was doing in the HTML. So if you know HTML and JavaScript, this should be a simple thing, because also here in the pending, most of the things I did is for changing, like you can see I got these IDs, and I'm just changing the text. I'm just changing the text of those things. You can see if the payment is success, I'm just getting the initial message. Instead of saying STK push has been sent, I'm telling them payment successful, then I'm displaying this SVG here. Then I'm also changing this other text. I'm saying thank you for completing your payment. Instead of saying waiting, I don't know waiting for what, tell them thank you for completing your payment. Then if it's not successful, I'm saying payment failed, then I'm displaying an icon there. Then I'm saying what happened here in this description, what happened. Yeah, so that's what I've done, and it's just, yeah, but the main things are the ones that I've explained in detail. This is just how you want it to look. Maybe you can just see how it is right now, and you can confirm it's working fine. So if now I just put my number, then put 1. So if I click this pay, that's what we had here in the payment form. Initially when I click pay, it was taking too long, then ilikuwa inabaki tu pay hivyo. So someone can click it again thinking that it has not submitted. So to prevent that, I put this small spinner here saying that it is still processing, so that someone cannot click again. This thing I'm talking about. So if I click, you can see it's processing, so that someone cannot click it again. Then now STK inakuja. If the STK comes and if I cancel, this is hidden, that payment confirmation there is hidden. Then this upper text is changed to payment failed. Then there's this car icon here. Then this is the actual description that I get from the API. I display it here. Then I display this another icon here. Then I put retry payment. Then you can see this retry payment, what it does with that button, it just reloads the page. It does not do anything, it just reloads the page. So you can choose, maybe you can choose, maybe if someone clicks retry, instead of reloading, you can choose they go back to the form, how you want it to be. But I thought maybe if they cancel, maybe they can just retry, so that the STK can come again, so that now they enter the pin. So the retry just reloads the page. I think I showed you the code. It just reloads the page. It's up here in the pending. Initially it's hidden, but it's there. You can see it's here, but initially the display is none, but it's there. If you click, it just reloads the page, nothing more. So now maybe I can enter the wrong pin, so that you can see it's working the way I showed you. You can see now it's saying the initiator information is invalid. Payment failed, initiator is invalid. And now if I try to pay, maybe now I can do the actual payment. Or no, I can take too long to pay. Let me just check the time that I set. I think I set, what is it? I set some I set some 30 seconds. So maybe I can retry. Then I don't do anything. I just leave the STK to just stay in my phone for some 30 seconds or so, and see that it will tell me that I took too long to pay. So now this depends with that how you want it to be. As long as you understand how it works, now you can just make it to work according to your preference. So let's just wait for some seconds. I think I did the math right. Too long to confirm the payment, please try again. Yeah, so that's when someone takes too long. So maybe now I can now do the actual payment. So I retry, then now I pay. So if I pay, I've paid. You see to tell me payment successful, then there's that confetti that is there. Yeah, so you can add some more things to make it even more interesting. And now we have developed the app from scratch until you have finished it. We did all the backend code, all the code that we had written before. I didn't see the need for us repeating what we wrote before. The ones that I explained in details are the new codes that we didn't write before. But the other codes, like for the STK push, the query, and all these other functions that we wrote before, I didn't explain them again because we already did that in the previous video. So yeah, that's it for this video, guys. I hope it was interesting and you learned a lot. So see you in the next video where we'll have the same thing but now using JavaScript. So see you there. Peace out. Before you forget, all this code is available on my GitHub page. I think I'm tired, it's 12:21 a.m. and I was still recording, but the good thing is that tomorrow is Sunday, so no big deals. So yeah, the code is on GitHub. I'll provide the link in this video's description. So now, for real, peace out.